So that's how I plan to do the talk. I'm hoping to get 35 minutes, but we'll see. Next, or perhaps the books, two of my favourite authors there. Next, used for adverts sometimes. This was John Lewis in 2014. There's a nice Daily Penguin there. Next, find what penguins have got to do with sushi. I have no idea, but there we go. Next, or what they've got to do with gardening either, really. Next, this is a family member who loves we're going to get to say thank you. Next, I didn't know say should reduce these bags, and if you see one, let me know, please. I haven't got one, I'm going to have to get one. Next, people love dressing up as penguins. Next, and oh yes, penguins in the balloon fiesta a few years ago. Next, and of course you all know about the Wallace and Gromit, a penguin story. And that wonderful chase on the Monroe was brilliant, wasn't it? Next, and of course he ended up in the water bottle or in the milk bottle. Now, this was Bristol Zoo penguins, archive pictures of mine, when they had these two different species. Of course, neither of them, well, because there's no penguins there now, so I'll tell you now. Next, and this view you'll know very well. I live there. So I got the most fantastic, I had the most fantastic view of the penguins, and I could give you word for word at 3 o'clock talk every day, because I could hear that feeding time. Next, and that's the view I get. But they're all gone now. The last ones, the penguins went about a month ago. So for me, that is terribly, terribly sad. Well, in fact, the whole closure of the zoo for me is terribly sad because I've got this wonderful view over the zoo. Never mind. Next. So I've got a few pictures now of the African penguins that were in the zoo. So we'll just scroll through these quickly, Alistair. Next. Oh, this is quite fun because there's two youngsters there, different stages. Next. Feeding time. Next. And of course, molting, they have to molt. And no, go back, please. And since I observe them a lot of the time, I can see that, in fact, go back, please. The one or what was the next one with the writing on it? Yep, stop. I can observe that, in fact, they're very similar to us, really. In their behaviour, we're sociable, we're clumsy a lot of the time, and we're argumentative. Because the difference is they're only clumsy on land. Of course, in the water, they're absolutely beautiful. Next. Jackass penguins, yes, that's the other name, because that's the noise that they make, like I used to be able to hear all the time. Next. And so, of course, they had this wonderful underwater views you can get, or you used to be able to get in the zoo. Difficult to take pictures because the light's so poor there, but still, next. But it's great to be able to see them. Next. Other zoos. Visited quite a lot of different zoos and see the penguins. This is Edinburgh Zoo. Gen 2 penguins seem to be one of their specialities. I love those little tops they've got to the nest area. Nest little, they're not foxes, but you know what I mean. Next. But they've had a leucistic Gen 2, which is really interesting. Next. And there it is in the water. Next. And they've got rockhoppers there as well. Next. And kings. Next. Now I'm going to tell you a little bit about the way penguins, one way in which they're organized in groups of species, and this comes from this particular book. Next. But here, first of all, there's a list of them in size order. Don't worry too much about that. I'm going to be talking about mainly the ones in red, because those are the ones I've seen wild. Most of the ones in black are very difficult to see or very expensive to go and see them. Next. So this is one way that it can be organised. We've got ones which have got those sort of crests on their heads. There's 6 of them in that group. Next. And then the banded group, which includes the familiar ones, the African, the jackass ones. I'll talk about my imaginary ones later on. Next. Bush-tailed group. Again, I should talk about a bit more about those. Next. Large group. Well, that's very vague, isn't it? But, they are the 2 largest, of course. Next. And these obviously couldn't fit into any group, so they just made an extra group for them. So anyway, that's one way of doing it. Now, how long do they live? That's the obvious question. Rock hobbers don't live really as long as you might expect penguins to live. They have a really, really tough life. And if you've seen television programs about penguins in places like Falkland Islands, then you'll know why, because it's so difficult to get to and from their nesting areas and have to try and land in crashing seas on the. So they have a really tough life. Magellanians have it much easier. Next, feathers. So those are the reasons why they have feathers, as it were, or the advantages of them, what they provide. When you see those wonderful pictures on frozen courage of particularly the emperors jumping out of the water, as they come up and go onto the land, you can see that trail behind of their bodies, all trapped in their skin and on their feathers, and they shoot out of the water and land. Some of that is absolutely fabulous. I'd love to have seen that. I've never seen that particular bit of behaviour. Next. Yes, that says what they need to say. Next. Now, as far as nesting is concerned, Magellanians have burrows, so they're very comfortable. That's probably another reason why they are longer lived. Adelies just have a scrape like the one on the right there with its egg, and as I'll explain later, and kings don't have anything at all. Next. They keep their eggs in a sort of fold of skin just above their feet, and they waddle around with that. More about that later. Next. So these are the places where I'm going to show you pictures of penguins of the different species. Next. And we've got to make sure that we don't muddle up, as some people do, penguins with auks, because, as you know, penguins are just the southern hemisphere. But we have lots of auks which look very similar to penguins, don't they? Brunix guillemots, that was taken in Svalbard, that one. Next. But they've got the same general pattern, haven't they, of body features. White at the front, black at the back, good camouflage. Next. And of course, we've got our beloved guillemots. Next. And our equally beloved puffins and razorbills. All the same kind of body camouflage. Next. Now, a good place to see the wild African penguins is Cape Town. Next. And there's a place called Boulders Beach, which you can go to, and you can watch the penguins come and go. At one time, you're actually able to swim there. You can now. Next. But you can watch them go up from the beach, and they nest under people's houses there. Next. And then the Galapagos penguins. Next. And we all know how brilliant the Galapagos is for birds in general. So we've got some lovely blue-footed boobies here. It's such a fabulous place. Next, penguins are actually not very easy to see. The best way of seeing is to snorkel. I snorkeled off this beach, and next, later on, I took about the only decent photograph I've got of Galapagos penguins. But if you actually see them in the water, they shoot past at high speed. It's amazing. Next. I've not seen these live, but you do see them in various zoos in this country, the Humboldt penguins. And that information yellow is really quite encouraging, isn't it? You know that this species is increasing in number. Next, they also live in burrows, and here's not my picture, obviously. I got this from the television. Next, New Zealand is a very good place for penguins. At least it is if you've got plenty of money to go and see them on the various islands around New Zealand. Next, but you won't see one of the giant penguins, which apparently looked that particular size and shape. Extraordinary animals, now extinct. Next. But there they come in size, increasing in size there. So they were pretty massive creatures with huge beaks. Next. These are the penguins. I've not seen any of these species, which you can see in New Zealand or the islands. Royal, Snares Crested and Fiordland. Next. And there's if they repeat this series of programs, do watch them. It's I think that says Earth's tropical islands, yes. So then you'll see some of these are rather unusual and difficult to see penguins. I think those are the Fiordland, not sure. Next. Next, please. Thank you. This is the place that we went to try and see one particular species. And they've even got a lovely observation up there. But next, please. They even give you a timetable of when to see them and what times of year and so on. We didn't see any there. So our guide took us to another place. Next, here. And next, you went in a very extraordinary place into what a little bit like the First World War tunnel. Next, trench, that's the word, yeah. And next, eventually, you poke your head through one or two areas where you can actually see any penguins that might be there, and you can see the yellow-eyed penguin. Next. So, remarkable animals, these. Next. And on the beach, we also saw one of the other species. This is the smallest one, the blue fairy penguin. If you go to Australia, particularly I'm thinking in Melbourne, there's a place where you can go and see them coming and going. Next. Oh, I thought I'd just put in a little bit about albatross linked with New Zealand, because it's an opportunity for me to see the wandering albatross. I got a bit of it at the end. I hope there's time for me to show you that, because they're just such magnificent birds. Next. And I went out on a boat to observe them, and they put out offal, and these birds came in. Lots of different petrels came in. Next. So here are some of them. Next. So that's a place called Kaikoura. So if you ever go to Kaikoura, New Zealand, make sure you go on the albatross experience boat. Next. Okay, Magellanics. That's their distribution down the bottom of South America, mainly. Next. Now, I went to a place in the Valdez Peninsula, which is there. We actually went to see something. We didn't actually go there specifically to see penguins, but the place we were staying at, the estancia, the person who owned that owned a lot of the coastline, and there was a large colony of Magellanics, which we were able to go to with him. Next. And these are just some of them. Next. And so you could observe them nesting. Next. And molting. Next. Get really close to them. They didn't seem to mind us. Next. This is the route that we watched going towards the sea, but as you can see, it was quite a rough day. So they looked as if they were going to go in. Next. But they decided against it. Next. The beautiful foxes they have there, and they do actually attack the. I think they will focus on the injured birds there. Next. Other interesting animals, birds that we saw there. I just love these hairy armadillos. Next. Fantastic, great horned owl. Is that a magnificent bird? And another owl. Next. Burrowing owls. Just posing nicely on top of their hole. Next. And caracaras. Next. And on the beach, where we spend a lot of our time, I'll explain why in a moment, you can see a whole line there of imperial cormorants. Then we've got some royal terns and a kelp gull there. And the reason we were there was to see what you're going to see in the next slide. Next. That's why we went. We were incredibly fortunate to see the orcas hunting the baby sea lions on the beach. There's a long story associated with that, but I couldn't resist putting that picture in. That's why we went to the Valdez Peninsula. Next. Okay, next going to, unfortunately, to the bottom of the route to get to the Falkland Islands, which is where we're going to next. But there's a map of them, which is obviously pretty familiar, I would guess, and Stanley there, Port Stanley, the capital, next. And there's a few Magellanics. You can't go onto the beach because of unexploded ordnance. Next. But there are excellent islands to go to, Pebble Island in particular, next. And that's how you get there, on the FIGAS aircraft. And that's the airport. Field, really. Next, and that's absolutely typical of the Falkland Islands. Very windy, but very exciting place to go for wildlife. Next, and there's Magellanics. These are all slides, by the way, because I hadn't gone digital when I went there. Next, and they've got their holes in the ground in Magellanics mixed up with the sheep. Next, and this is my first opportunity to see wild rockhoppers. Next. That's where there's the Falklands there somewhere. Because that's South Georgia, that's the bottom of South America. So that's where the rockhoppers mainly live. Next. And the next. Brilliant birds. Next. And you sit on the edge of the colony and you watch them coming and going next. And then they come right up to you. That's my shoe there. They're just very interested. Next. And we've got a leucistic one. Our guy was fascinated by that. You don't think you'd ever seen a rockhopper, a leucistic rockhopper before. Next. And that's a close-up of it. Next. Loads of gentoos there. And with youngsters. This was in just about Christmas time. Next. They've got that characteristic white blotch, haven't they, just above the eye. Next. So again, you can just sit by the colony. You mustn't go into the colony, disturb them, but you can sit and watch them coming and going. Next. See them being fed, the youngsters. Next. There's two there. And in the colony, we saw this, which is actually a young king penguin. I think it thought it was a Gen 2. So I think we saw 5 different species of penguins on the Pebble Island, because we saw a red-crested as well. There was a red-crested one in amongst the rockhoppers. Next. And you get these amazing caracaras. These are the birds which, if you put your pack down, your rucksack down, they'll come along and they'll start poking around inside and taking things out. Amazing. Next. And of course, skuas, very similar to the skuas we were familiar with, who predate on the penguins. Next. So then volunteer reaches where you can see the king penguins. Next. And again, next. And I've already explained about the brood patch. Next. Now, this is an important thing, because if you disturb them at all, if they've got the egg on their brood patch, if they drop the egg out because you're disturbing them, they won't go refetch the egg again. It's lost for that year, or for that period of time anyway. So you have to be really careful not to disturb them too much. Next. Saunders Island. This is next. This is for another wonderful albatross species, black-browed albatross. Next, just a few slides, we'll go through these quickly. Next. It's just brilliant being amongst these magnificent birds that are taking no notice of you at all. Now, this is the last part, Antarctica and South Georgia. That's, you just go back on please. That's what you see when you arrive at South Georgia. Wonderful vistas of mountains and glaciers and icebergs. Next. And so we'll start with a few pictures of one or two of the islands around Antarctica. Next, the emperor penguins. Well, we know about these wonderful BBC films that we can see. Next. But some friends of mine did go, and they sent me one or two pictures of them taking pictures of the emperors. Next. But you might, the March of the Penguins, that film by Morgan Freeman, you might remember that. I think that was a lot of people's first introduction to the amazing life cycle of these fantastic penguins. Next. This is on the South Orkney Islands, which are just off the coast of Antarctica. And they're British islands, but the only people living there are Argentinians, which is amazing, really, considering what happened in 1982. Anyway, we went there, and we were the first ship to go there for that season, so they gave us a party, which was very nice. Some of us, after the party, walked around. Next, and we saw some of the penguins there. Next. So that's where the Adelies are to be found. They're true Antarctic penguins. I think I would have to say they're my favourites. Next. But while we were there, the snowstorm grew up, and the captain orders us back to the ship, so that was a shame, really. Next. But we did visit another island, the name of which is hidden by the bottom line of stuff. I've forgotten the name temporarily, sorry. Next. But this is where we saw chinstraps. And at 8 million, it's quite extraordinary, really, on islands around the Antarctic. Next. The youngster being fed. Next. And again, if you're careful, you can get really close without disturbing them. That was sitting on the nest. Next. That was the ship we were on, a Russian research ship. And we were able to land next and take a really close look at the lifestyle of the Adelie penguins. Next. And one or two we tried to fly. No, of course they weren't. Next. Eating ice to get its water supply. Next. So that was the general scene of Paulet Island. Next. And we had some fantastic photographers with us. That's Angie Scott, married to Jonathan Scott, who you may have seen presenting all kinds of wildlife programs. One of the best wildlife photographers around, in my book anyway. I learned a lot from watching her. Next. And here's Chris Packham lying right down in the stones and the ice, trying to get ground level pictures of the Adelies coming on shore. Next. So it was actually a time when they were starting to produce chicks. Next. Hatching day. Next. So there's just a chick just there. Next. Now, finally, we're going to go to South Georgia. That is 3 days sailing from Ushuaia in some of the most troublesome, as we could call it, waters in the world. And you've got to be a good sailor. You never get seasick. Fortunately, I know. So, but some of my friends were terribly seasick. Next. So this is what you might see when you arrive to South Georgia. It looks a bit forbidding. Next. And all the places of interest really are on the north coast, all the penguin colonies and all the places where you might find people. Because obviously in the southern hemisphere, that is the side. Next. And lots of other things apart from penguins. These are amazing fur seals. That's a huge male. Next. And the youngsters are very aggressive as well. Next. And of course you get the elephant seals as well. If you're there at the right time of year, we were there in about November, which then there were still some of these around before we went off back to sea. Next. but of course these kings were very friendly. Next. The statistic at the bottom was the number of king penguins in South Georgia. I can't remember what it is now, but it is, I think it's around about 1 million. Next. Now, this is a rather peculiar picture. This gentleman here is Paul Goldstein, who's a professional wildlife photographer. I just happened to be standing next to him on this particular beach when he saw something rather unusual happening just here. And he turned to me and said, "Charles, take that now." Next. So those two have obviously got their heads right behind and doing a little bit of free behind. That picture's earned me a lot of money, actually. It's only taken me any kind of reasonable amount of money. Next. That, I think, is a really interesting picture. And I keep badgering the BBC Wildlife magazine, and then I publish it because I've never seen a picture of a melanistic penguin, let alone a melanistic king penguin. Next. Oh, macaronis, we haven't seen those yet. There's a big colony of them on South Georgia. So here's a few pictures of them. Next. Next. And this is one of the big, this is Salisbury Plain, one of the big colonies of king penguins on South Georgia. I just had to put that verse there from the Psalms, because one of the few places in the world where you can still say that. Next. Captain Cook arrived here. He and his crew, quite reasonably, thought there were two different species there, rather than being all the brown fluffballs, as we call them, being the youngsters. Next. Next. There's Angie taking pictures of the king penguins. I hasten to add that I don't have equipment anything like as expensive as hers. Next. So this is why you see them at different stages, because unlike most penguin species that have chicks every year, these only have breed twice in 3 years. So you get lots of different stages of the penguins. Next. See here. Next. Oh, snowy sheathbills. They look very sweet, but they're actually quite aggressive little birds and scavengers. Next. That's Gold Harbour with that wonderful Penguin glacier above and a mixture of the penguins and the seals. When you get on shore, it's just mind-blowing because you don't know where to look and what to see and what to start photographing. Next. Well, the elephant seal with female. Next. We went back to Gold Harbour twice, and in the evening, the light wasn't very good, so I tried panning. Paul Goldstein explained how to do that. All the animals in the background are static, but the one in the foreground is moving. So you just move the camera around with it as it's moving. Next. So that's the kind of effect you get, which is rather interesting. Panning. Next. Oh, that's the video I'm going to show you at the end. Next. Almost at the end now. Because I just next wanted to advertise the cards I got. So you already bought some. Thank you very much indeed. What I get given for this talk, plus profits from these cards, go to this amazing charity, Cane Harvest Children's Home at Badilla in Sri Lanka. I can tell you more background if you're particularly interested in that. Next. But we're raising money at the moment for various things. We've just raised money enough for them to buy a bus to take the children to school. Thanks also to Clifton Rotary Club and one or two other organisations. These are some of the children. Next. And I've got some cards with penguins on. They've got a mixture of penguins and polar bears, including the headless ones. Next. That's the end. Thank you, Alistair. If we could have a look at the two videos, that would be great. take a moment just because we had to transfer the videos from, because it's on Zoom, I couldn't use my own laptop. So the videos wouldn't work on this laptop. So I had to use the one of these black boxes to transfer the videos from my laptop onto the black box. And now Alice is going to try and dig out those videos from the black box.
Can't see what
Let's see. We've got two videos. One is of the albatross in New Zealand, and the other one of king penguins on South Georgia. We'll have a go at trying to see them anyway. That's my camera. Quite new model now. Brilliant, these Lumix cameras. What do we do? We put them on the black box. Here we are. Let's have that one first. Thank you, Alistair. This is taken from the boat and they put that on. In a moment, you'll see one of the birds flying in. Here it comes now. The wandering albatross, and this one's obviously the local boss. So it has first choice of the uncle. Right, can we go on to the second one, please? I'm sorry, I was hoping we might get some of the sound, but there's sound from the penguins in this one. Anyway, this is a couple having a bit of an argument. Oh, thank you. Is it Gen 2 just coming into this picture? That's just very quick. That's the best we can do with the videos, I'm afraid. Anyway, that's the end of the talk. Thank you very much.
That was excellent. Thank you very much for that. Sorry about all the technical snafus, but there we go. Get there in the end. I've seen warming, whereas they normally live in snow and ice. They getting rain instead.
The youngsters have been brought up in mud, whereas they should be brought up in also temperature increase. Due to global warming, species are in danger as it were for extermination, but certainly some of the
things like Russian and Chinese factory ships just sucking the life out of the sea.
I was aware that they are, but although the ones in Africa, the ones in Cape Town area have been really hit by a lot of the fishing that goes on, reducing the amount of fish that the penguins can catch. But there are some conservation efforts paying dividends there.
And yes, got a question
Around the Antarctic. There would be, yes. But I'm not aware that there's a feeding problem for the penguins in that area. It's not like the arguments you hear about Yorks around this country, where the sand eels are being reduced in number. Well, whatever the reasons are, yeah.
What happened to the penguins at Bristol Zoo?
I don't know where they've gone, because one day they were there, I looked out, and the next day they'd gone. I wasn't around at home when they took them away. I was really hoping to see them actually take them away. They must have gone to another zoo. Well, the only animals that I'm aware of are the lions, because I hear them all the time, and the gorillas, because I can see the gorillas. And they're going to move the gorillas out to the wild place when they build the new enclosure for them, but they can't afford to buy the make a new enclosure at the moment. So at the moment, the gorillas are going to stay there for some considerable time. The Bristol Zoo gorillas.
They're still
They
there.
only are, and they will be there. They will be there, I reckon, for another year at least, because they're in enclosure at the wild place. They totally can afford to. I may have got that all wrong, but I think that's right. Thank you.
There are not many of the animals.
To the internet.
Yeah, not many of those among them.
No, that's a lot of people think exactly what. That's, but it's only the gorillas that. They're definitely going.
Skills and so on. I mean, if we tried to get that close. To the seals around the UK.
Yes, the first seals are very aggressive, and there's one particular island where you can see the. I haven't been there, but I believe that to get to that, you've got to go through this huge colony of fur seals, and they're really aggressive, and you've got to be really careful you don't get bitten. But the elephant seals are much more placid, and not the big males, but the youngsters and the females. The elephant seals are very placid, so there's a problem with them. But they don't seem to have any fear of.
Anybody else? Well, if not, thanks. I'm sorry I had to put you through all the technical hassles and make you sit through the AGM, but it's well worth the wait, and it's a fantastic presentation.
Very nice. Before you go, you've got time.
Well, that draws the sort of meeting towards its end. And the next two meetings will be on Zoom only. So that'll be one less thing to worry about. Trying to manage two different audiences. If you can get this thing to work properly, then I think for the following season, we may try and do all the meetings here, plus the Zoom broadcast. So we kind of cater for all comers, really. Because I know people like to meet other people, but we're all bound here, so trying to do it on the phone, it's a bit of a flaky signal, but we'll get there in the end. So thank you once again.
We won't do Zoom only.
Yeah, we will in January and February. In January and February.
Yeah, I know, but other than that, I mean, yeah, yes.